we don't always maybe think about it. Maybe it's not always conscious that the breath is a very powerful way to regulate our emotions.
One thing I wanted to go back on, you said you had a holotropic breath experience where you kind of saw your birth and were able to kind of see what was going on. How, does holotropic breathwork explain, like, the reason for that happening through just breathwork?
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's not a lot of research on, like, brain scans and stuff like that. I think Wim Hof has had an fMRI study done on his brain. His breathing technique's a little bit different, so I don't know. I haven't looked at those studies yet. I definitely need to check that out. But in the holotropic breath work, the one thing that's talked about is just the change in physiology and, like, blood. So the blood becomes a little bit more alkaline, and you're thinking you're bringing all this oxygen in and becoming super oxygenated. But there's kind of like something else that's happening, and you're actually bringing a little bit more CO2 into the blood. And so when you're exercising and moving and actually using a lot of that oxygen and breathing heavy, you're becoming more oxygenated. But when you're just sitting and doing this in a still kind of setting, your blood becomes a little bit more alkaline, and there's a little bit more CO2 buildup in the blood. And so, what does that do physiologically on the body and the brain? I don't know if we're really too sure, because there hasn't been enough, like, research in that area. So I don't know. It's a question, like, I always think about. I'm like, what's going on here, right? Like. Yeah. Maybe it's just too early to find out, since there hasn't been too much research done in that world. But I'd be interested in checking out some of the Wim Hof research and kind of following up on that and see what some of their conclusions are. But in the holotropic breathwork world, there's not too much discussion on, like, what's going on physiologically besides, like, changes in blood alkalinity. But yeah, what is that doing to the brain, right? I don't really know. How is that shifting consciousness? I guess from Stan's perspective is that, all these different tools are just ways to access these non-ordinary states, and tapping into this innate kind of inner wisdom, inner healer. And, as I said before, there's multiple different ways of getting there, whether that's through breath work, psychedelic substances. If you look at certain indigenous rites, you had people sit in isolation. Think about, like, the allegory of the cave by Plato, just being in the cave in darkness, but, there was fire going, like little fire things going on. But, these non-ordinary states can happen through all sorts of different practices and techniques. And so, yeah, it's the hard problem of consciousness at this point of, like, what is consciousness? What's going on? Is the brain affecting any of this, or is consciousness just coming through us? So, yeah, they're hard questions to answer, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting to I've done a couple breath workshops, and I wouldn't say I was skeptical. And I don't know if you're familiar with Troy Casey, but he has like a 5-10 minute kind of run through that he does. It's some Wim Hof, it's some Breath of Fire type stuff, and I kind of thought he was, like, over dramatically when he did some of his inhale holds and his exhale holds, where I thought he might have been faking, like, passing out or going into another right. dimension, until I really, the third or fourth time where I really got into it, and then almost fell on my face at the park. And realize, okay, yeah, you can definitely get yourself high just by tapping into some of these and really getting into it and working hard. Do you guys have any events on the schedule coming up, either where you're at or in Colorado or anything like that?
Joe and I don't have anything on the books for Psychedelics Today. Through my other page, Setting Sun, I host smaller breathwork workshops around the New Jersey area from time to time. I'm trying to schedule some workshops around my area in northwestern New Jersey at the moment. So nothing on the books. I'm just trying to plan with some yoga studios. And then with Psychedelics Today, Joe and I are in the stages of planning some psychedelic harm reduction workshops as well as some breathwork workshops. But yeah, we're just still planning some things right now.
All right. And how is it being in New Jersey, covering these sorts of topics, we're in Denver in a time to be alive where we just decriminalized psilocybin mushrooms not too long ago. So we're living in a much different world than what we were living when we were back in New Jersey. So I'm just curious as to, how that works in Jersey, or, what are the conversations? Are they well received? Are you still getting those weird looks like we get from some of the people we talk with back home?
Yeah, New Jersey is interesting. It almost feels like it's in the Stone Age. I mean, even in relation to Colorado and cannabis laws, I mean, New Jersey is just still struggling to pass any sort of law here, right? I mean, they're just starting to expand their medical program, and they're not even entertaining the idea of decriminalization, and that just even falls into drug policy stuff. And I think we're even still a year or two away from legalization. So sometimes I feel like New Jersey is a little bit behind in a lot of this stuff, and it was definitely a difficult transition for me to move back to this area after living in a very liberal, open-minded place such as like Burlington, Vermont. But, I'm actually really surprised about some of the, I get a lot of people that reach out that find my name on either the MAPS list, which is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. They have an integration list. My name's on there. And then sometimes people find us on Psychedelics Today. And, there's like, hey, there's nothing going on around here, but I'm interested. And so it's interesting hosting breathwork workshops around the area, because to talk about my lineage of breathwork, and this isn't true for all forms of breathwork, but I'm in the lineage of like the holotropic breathwork, is Stan's clinical background is in psychedelic psychotherapy. And so, I sometimes will skate around the issue or just mention it briefly when I do like a breathwork introduction. And I'm actually very surprised about the people that are interested, and a lot of people are becoming more interested. I mean, it's just amazing how much influence Michael Pollan has had.
Yeah.
And, I think the last workshop I did was a few weeks ago, and I think at least like 4 people came up to me afterwards and said, I'm so interested in psychedelic psychotherapy. I read Michael Pollan's book. There's been a few people in the past that said, I've attended plant medicine ceremonies around here. And so I think it's just a very quiet community, and I think a lot of people are just are in the closet, I guess you would say, in a sense, and not really too sure where to look or who to reach out to. So, the people are around. It's just about trying to create that community and find the others, as Tim Leary and Terrence McKenna used to say.
Your vibe attracts your tribe.
Yeah, and I'm hosting workshops out in like the rural part of New Jersey, where part of it's very like pretty conservative, and so for some of these participants to say, hey, I'm really interested in psychedelics and this and that, I'm like, whoa, okay, this is kind of cool, you guys are out here. So that gives me a little bit of hope for this area, which is exciting. But yeah, it does feel challenging at times, because the open-mindedness, I don't think is on par with say Denver or California and stuff like that.
Breathwork is the gateway drug.
Yeah. Maybe
So
that's our new tagline.
Get high on your own supply.
That's Wim Hof's tagline,
is
actually.
It?
Yeah.
I've been, I don't know if you're familiar with Simon Rex, but he's been hanging out with Wim Hof a lot lately. So he says that on his podcast and stuff.
Oh, cool.
With the people that you're coming in contact with that are, approaching the subject of psychedelics, are they interested in assisted therapy? Are they more into microdosing? Like, what's the landscape look like with the people that are coming to you with questions and stuff? Where are they looking to?
I think it's a mix. Some people are really interested in the therapy kind of, I would say the therapy, self-discovery, shamanic framework of, they want to work through deep things. They want to do this in a guided session. They want, maybe this is their first time, or they haven't done it in a really long time. Maybe they experimented when they were really in their younger years, like most college kids and, young adults do. And then they stop because life happens and they get families. And so, some of these people are just older and their kids are growing up and they're starting to kind of rediscover this stuff again. And now with all the science that's like validating the therapeutic use, people are becoming really interested in therapeutic use and having these guided sessions. And, Michael Pollan talked about having guided sessions. And so, we get a lot of emails saying like, oh, Pollan had talked about doing this with a guide. How do I find a guide? And so, there's a good mix of people that just want a guided, safe session. And then there's other people, that are interested, that have struggled, say, with like mental health issues for a while, and maybe the high dose or medium dose psychedelic experience is a little bit frightening. Just that idea of a bad trip or what could happen could be really frightening for them. So some of these folks are interested in microdosing because they've been reading these anecdotal stories of microdosing helping with anxiety and depression and or even, some people are talking about creativity and microdosing. So, I think it's a mix.
What is your take on, the benefits of microdosing and the benefits of an active dose or a macro dose and what you can get from both those experiences?
Yeah, so on our recent podcast, which released 2 weeks ago, I interviewed Dr. Torsten Passy, who wrote a book called The Science of Microdosing Psychedelics. And so, he was he went back in time, in a sense, and reviewed all this research that was done in the 50s and 60s on low-dose psychedelics and trying to understand if microdosing actually has any validity. And then Joe just recorded an episode that's released today on Tuesday. What's today? August 6th. With Dr. David Nichols, who's a chemist and really well-known chemist in this field. I mean, he's probably produced all the psychedelics for all the research here in the States and whatnot. And both of them are a little bit skeptical of like what's being talked about with microdosing. Dr. Nichols doesn't really believe there's any validity to microdosing and creativity and thinks that some of this is placebo. When I was interviewing Dr. Passy, he was talking about there's actually somewhat of a decrease in cognitive functioning, and that sometimes people felt a little bit more anxiety. Maybe they took a little bit too much of a microdose, which was more maybe in a mini dose range. And so there's not a lot of like research happening in this area. There's starting to become some more studies to try to validate what's going on here. But I think it might be a little too early to kind of say that it's actually beneficial or not beneficial from a scientific research standpoint. But if you read people's anecdotal stories and subjective experiences, there's a lot of people talking about how it's helped them with their anxiety. Some people talked about like how it's helped them with their medication. If they've been on SSRIs, maybe they started microdosing and helped them kind of down their dose or kind of get off medications. So microdosing, I think, is just still in this early stage of, a lot of these subjective experiences, and then the science just isn't really there yet to validate. But I did, when I did talk to Dr. Passy, he did say that like a microdose or mini dose actually improves motor functioning, which I was just on a panel the other night for this event in New York, and the topic was psychedelics and physical fitness. And so we were chatting about, can psychedelics induce flow states? And it seemed like from Dr. Passy's point of view that they could potentially be useful for flow states and kind of getting out of your own way and kind of getting out of your mind, maybe dropping into your body a little bit more. And, some of the people that we interviewed, and I know you mentioned Ben Eddy, he talked about using psychedelics when sparring for jiu-jitsu and stuff like that, so like low doses of mushrooms. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic, and